If everyone does decide to declare, this upcoming class is ridiculous in terms of depth. If you've been following my work, this probably isn't overly shocking since I brought up my concerns about Gordon in the past. To catch everyone else up, it's been a bit of a mess of a year for Gordon. Neal has been one of my favorite backs to watch these past couple of years, and I'm honestly surprised he didn't declare for the draft last year. He likely would have been the third, maybe even second running back drafted, but he likely bet on himself to raise his draft capital with how late the 2024 backs were being taken. There's a lot to like about Johnson, and while he may fit into this very specific role for an offense, he should be very good at that role in the NFL. In his freshman year, he looked like a great rusher, but wasn't reliable in the receiving game. As a sophomore, things kind of flipped when he became a very reliable receiver, but took a step back as a rusher. This year, he has combined the best parts of both of those seasons, and looks like a complete back. Hey y'all, back with my midseason running back rankings. With the sheer volume of running backs in this class, I ended up with a ranking of my top 20 running backs in this class with some honorable mentions. If everyone does decide to declare, this upcoming class is ridiculous in terms of depth, so there's still a lot of backs that didn't make the top 20 or even my honorable mentions who could still have an impact in the NFL. So if there's anyone that you think is too low or too high, or even just someone that I didn't cover at all, please put them in the comments. Also, like my quarterback rankings, these aren't as in-depth as my end of the year running back rankings, but more of a ranking based on what I've seen so far. Also, like my quarterback rankings, I have counts for my top 5 backs of this upcoming class to get some perspective of what I think of their impact in the NFL could look like. With all the running backs that we gotta cover, let's get to the rankings. Before we get to the top 20 backs, I want to start with a few honorable mentions, starting with Makhi from Tulane. Hughes has been solid this year and last year, and looks like he has the build to be a true 3-down back. To be honest, I just haven't watched much of Tulane this year, so I'm just not comfortable where I think he falls in the rest of the rankings, or also the fact that he might just also return for another year or may even transfer out. But I still want to include him since I do think he could end up in the top 20 backs for this year if he does decide to declare. Another honorable mention is Harvey from UCF. I actually like Harvey a lot and really like his burst and vision, but what holds him back outside of the top 20 are his size and age. Being 5'9", 208 pounds isn't necessarily a deal breaker, but being 25 years old on draft day at his size likely will be for a lot of NFL teams. I was bullish on this not being an issue for Blake Watson from Memphis last year, who I feel is a more talented player than Harvey, but he still went out and drafted. It's just hard for teams to get invested in backs this old when their rookie contracts will likely end when they're about 29. Also missing the cut is Desmond Reid from Pitt. Reid is a player who's a lot of fun to watch. He's one of the most explosive backs in the draft, is a great receiving back, and is a fun story to root for coming from Western Carolina. The problem for him is that Reid is 5'8", 175 pounds, and he may even be smaller than that. I just have major concerns that he'll be limited of what type of impact he can have in the NFL at his size, leading him to be this low. Now, this size isn't a deal breaker since he is pretty similar in size to Tariq Cohen, who had a good career before an ACL injury derailed that career. That being said, Cohen isn't exactly the standard and what we can expect from backs, as there's been more backs who haven't panned out at Reid's size than ones who succeeded. With this deep running back class, I personally feel like it might be in Reid's best interest to return for another year and use the offseason to bulk up to try to quiet some of these concerns. Another back I have is Kalel Mullings from Michigan. Mullings has been a surprise stud for Michigan after most people were excited about Donovan Edwards taking command of the backfield this year. However, Mullings has been great at using his size to get consistent gains and running with good vision despite limited playing time prior to this season and converting from linebacker in 2022. I do think he would benefit from returning to school for another year and continue to work on the nuance of the position and see if he can improve as a pass catcher. With his limited athleticism, I do think it would do wonders for him to be more fundamentally sound as a player in all areas of the position for his future outlook. For the final back who just missed a cut, I have Le'Veon Moss from Texas A&M. Like Mullings, Moss has enjoyed a nice breakout and looks promising, but needs to clean up his fumbles, drops, and pass protection. He shows the ability to have a full skill set and good size to handle a full workload, but I think he's just someone who probably would benefit from returning to school for another year and polishing those areas of his game. With what he has shown this year, he likely could be a top 10 back next year, so be sure to keep an eye on him for 2026. Now, getting to our actual list. At number 20, we have Monangai from Rutgers. I've seen a lot of people much higher Monangai than me after the start of this year, but I still feel like I have a lot of questions that haven't been answered by him. I still haven't seen him prove that he can be a reliable receiver, his athleticism still doesn't separate him from his peers, and his lack of size still pops out when watching him. His physical runs are fun, but I just fear that he's much more of a limited back than a lot of people believe, and that can lose him opportunities in the NFL. Now, if you're looking at him as an early down back, committee back, whatever, I don't think you'll be disappointed. But if you expect an every down back, I don't think that he'll be doing that in the NFL, and I think you're going to be disappointed. Next, number 19, we have Damien Martinez from Miami, who honestly could end up in the top 10 by the end of this year. Martinez came into the season with high expectations, but had a slow start to the year. At the time of recording this, he has put together some quality games and seems to be trending up. As I mentioned, right now I don't have him in the top 10 due to his earlier struggles and still having deficiencies on third down or passing downs, but he could find himself in the top 10 if he continues to improve in those areas and has a strong end to the season. Next, number 18, we have Jaquavius Woody Marks from USC. While I still have concerns about Marks as a runner between the tackles, he has looked great as a receiver, already putting up over 30 receptions for the year. He is an older prospect, but he's a player who you can have a clear vision of what he can do in the NFL with his receiving skills to be a change of pace back. I personally see him having a lower ceiling than some of his bigger fans, but I still think there's a clear place for him in the NFL on a lot of these pass-heavy offenses. Next, number 17, we have Tahj Brooks from Texas Tech. Despite this ranking, Brooks had a quality year, continuing to be a bully as a downhill rusher and showing that he still has soft hands. The problem is that he still just lacks a high ceiling that will likely limit him in the NFL. While he has good visions and safe hands, he's a pretty slow accelerator and lacks the burst to be able to make big plays. I just worry that his ceiling is a rotational player who isn't able to make much of an impact in the NFL. Now, maybe he gets an opportunity like James Robinson did, who's a pretty similar player and has a big impact early, but it's just hard to expect, and which team he ends up going to will likely determine if that's possible for him in the NFL. Next, number 16, we have Raheim Rocket Sanders from South Carolina. Now, I'm probably Sanders' number one fan with the way I've talked him up in the past, but I have to admit that he doesn't belong in the top 10 right now. I have been impressed with the way he fights for every yard, which honestly he's had to with the way South Carolina's line has been blocking again this year, and how he seems to be moving better now that he's healthy and potentially playing at a better weight. He did drop in the rankings though, since some of the injuries that he still racked up still make me a little bit nervous that it could be a continuing thing in the NFL, and I just feel that though he may have the skills to be a do-it-all back, he may be best suited as part of a committee, especially with his prior injury history. I don't have a comp for him, and it's way too early to comp him to this player, but I see Sanders going to a very similar role as Braylon Allen did going to the Jets to provide some relief to this more speedy back and be able to provide some more power in his opportunities. Maybe a team values his skill set more, but that type of situation is where I see him trending towards. Next, number 15, we have Dylan Sampson from Tennessee. I've seen some other people much higher in Sampson, but I just can't bring myself to be there yet. Personally, I view him as a lesser prospect than Jalen Wright from last year, and we just saw Wright fall all the way to the 4th round of a weak running back class. Sampson has some of the same things going against him, as both Wright and him benefited from Tennessee's spread scheme, but Sampson doesn't seem to be quite the pass blocker that Wright was. He also doesn't have the same contact balance as Wright, and hasn't been as productive as a receiver. I can understand having a vision of Sampson as a big play back in the NFL, but with so many running backs with great speed and burst now, I don't think teams value it quite as much as when they did the past few years when there were fewer superb athletes in the game. Next, number 14, we have Trevor Etienne from Georgia. I actually like a lot of what Etienne has done this year, as he seems to be running more decisively and with better contact balance. He also has been able to show he can handle full workload, which was a question for me. I just wonder what his ceiling is. He is solid in a lot of areas, but I don't think he exactly excels at anything, which could get him passed up by other backs. I think he could be a surprise quality player for a team if given the chance, but I'm just not certain he has the traits to justify high draft capital compared to his peers at this time. Next, number 13, we have DJ Giddens from Kansas State. Now, if I got these rankings out a few weeks ago like I originally planned, Giddens would have been much higher in these rankings. However, Giddens has started to return to his bad tendencies as a runner, losing his momentum due to moving sideways instead of lowering his shoulder, generally running with high pads, and just having shaky vision. Another thing that hasn't been great for Giddens is his high number of drops. Now, he has shown good hands and ability to catch the ball with good hand technique in the past, so I'm not overly concerned about that, and players can usually work through those drop issues. The big thing that I need to see him do more is just be more consistent. When he runs with good urgency and pad level, he's a top 10 back in this class. When he's not, he's closer to the 20th best back than he is to the 10th. I still have him at the 13th best back due to his pass blocking skills and overall skill set that let him play on every down. But he needs to work on excelling at every down if he wants to be high in these rankings. Next, number 12, we have Phil Mafah from Clemson. Mafah's had a really solid start to his year and has cleaned up the fumbles and his pass protection that were big issues for me last year. What holds Mafah back from being a top 10 back is just wanting to see how he holds up against better competition. As I mentioned in Klubnik's section and my quarterback rankings, which you can check out in this link that should be on the screen now, Clemson's had a pretty weak schedule to start the year outside of their game against Georgia, where basically everyone struggled. So I want to see how Mafah does against better competition. And I'd also just like to see him be more involved as a receiver since he still hasn't quite taken another step as a pass catcher. Next, number 11, we have Jordan James from Oregon, who is another back that was really hard to keep out of my top 10. He's been having a really great year and looks comfortable as a lead back at Oregon, but what ultimately holds him out of my top 10, and something that I still need to do a deeper dive into, is how much of his production is due to getting lighter boxes with the way defenses have to prioritize defending the pass game against Oregon. It's not exactly the same, but it's a bit of the Tennessee offense effect, where I keep finding James gets set up against lighter boxes to be able to have a clear path and pick up a head of steam to get a big gain. Now, credit to James for following through on his job, but I do have to wonder if he'd be more successful in a more traditional scheme, or one where defenses can play the offense more straight. Maybe it's a non-issue, but it's still something I want to look into more before my final rankings at the end of the year. Alright, finally getting into my top 10. Just barely cracking the top 10 with probably the most shocking entry, Ollie Gordon II from Oklahoma State at number 10. If you've been following my work, this probably isn't overly shocking since I brought up my concerns about Gordon in the past. To catch everyone else up, it's been a bit of a mess of a year for Gordon. His offensive line definitely doesn't help, but his contact balance and creativity as a runner has been severely lacking this year, with him either resorting to just plowing through defenders or just trying to hurdle them. Which isn't to discredit hurdles because they are sick, but I would just like to see him use his quick feet to make more defenders miss in the open field and not be stopped by the first tackler as often as he has this year. Now, this year hasn't all been bad for Gordon. He has looked better as a pass blocker, his vision does look slightly better, and he has done a better job focusing his efforts to get downhill and pick up whatever yards he can. I just worry that he doesn't have the skill set to be a dynamic back that a lot of people were projecting him as, especially with his questionable burst, which is essential for the type of back that people were projecting. At the time of recording this video, he has looked better in the past weeks, so I'm hoping he continues this momentum and keeps him placed in the top 10 or maybe even rise by the end of the year. Next, number 9, we have Jonah Coleman from Washington. Coleman is someone who I didn't include in my summer scouting series, but really should have been included. He's been a bowling ball of fun watching him this year carry defenders and almost never getting taken down by the first defender. He's also one of the best pass blocking backs I've seen in this class, which will go a long way to earning trust in the NFL from a coaching staff. Now, he does have limitations as an athlete, and that could ultimately hold him back. But we've had these concerns with other backs, and the backs who usually do overcome these issues are backs like Coleman, who have good size, contact balance, and pass blocking skills to justify them staying on the field. I mentioned before in one of my watch list videos, but there's just so much about Coleman that reminds me of Kyren Williams, and if he goes to the right situation, I could absolutely see him being a huge sleeper for a team. He definitely could just be a stopgap for a team, especially if he doesn't get much opportunity and goes to a team with a lackluster offensive line. But I just think there's a lot of translatable traits for the NFL that'll give him a chance of being a steal for an NFL team. Next, number 8, we have Bhayshul Tuten from Virginia Tech. Maybe I'm letting his Boston College game give me rose-tinted glasses, but Tuten has been great this year. He runs hard, making him hard to bring down, and he has cleaned up his drops that were a major issue in past seasons. Fumbles are still a big issue for him and something that will need to be cleaned up, but fumbles aren't always sticky stats, and he showed that he can clean up drops, so hopefully he's capable of cleaning up those fumbles as well. His footwork is honestly some of the best in his class, and he's so deliberate with all his movements to maximize his balance and stay strong against would-be tacklers, while still giving him a chance to make cutbacks and moves into open space. His footwork and pad level help him finish nearly every touch falling forward, which is such an important trait for a running back. On top of that, he has great vision and does a great job hugging his blocks to maximize his runs. Now, I'm not going to pretend like there's no faults to his game. He lacks the explosiveness and speeds that backs often need to succeed in the NFL. Also, while Tuten has cleaned up his hands, he's primarily just used on swing passes and hasn't shown much versatility outside of that. Also, he has had a lot of fumbles this year, like I've mentioned before, and needs to clean those up to avoid losing touches in the NFL. How much he can contribute in the receiving game, if he can reduce fumbles, and if he can overcome not having elite speed and burst, will likely determine his ceiling in the NFL. Next, number 7, we have Devin Neal from Kansas. Neal's been one of my favorite backs to watch these past couple of years, and I'm honestly surprised he didn't declare for the draft last year. He likely would have been the third, maybe even second running back drafted, but he likely bet on himself to raise his draft capital with how late the 2024 backs were being taken. So far, Neal has had a solid year. Kansas' offense has been a mess for a lot of the season, but Neal has been a steady force. Also, he has proven that he can handle a full workload in games, which was a question for me going into this season. I have been a little bit disappointed that his role in the receiving game has regressed a bit, but he still looks like a great receiver when given the opportunity, and still the explosive runner when the ball is in his hands. What unfortunately also looks the same is his poor pass blocking. Honestly, it's really rough at times, and I'm concerned it could cost him passing down opportunities in the NFL if it continues. Now, it is possible the team acknowledges that and just doesn't ask him to pass block like the Lions do with Jahmyr Gibbs, but Gibbs is a rare exception where a team is willing to overlook this. That being said, with Neal having some of the best bursts in the class, it's not impossible that a team would be willing to do the same with him. Next, at number 6, we have one of the biggest risers in this draft class, Kaleb Johnson from Iowa. Johnson was a decent player who showed flashes last year, but has been an absolute run this year. He's been a big play machine for Iowa and a true home run threat behind Iowa's offensive line. He does subtle things like doing a good job keeping his momentum going forward with minimal wasted movements and takes efficient pass to holes. Iowa's offensive line definitely makes things easier for him, and I like to see him be a bit more creative in the open field, but it's easy to see Johnson fitting into an NFL offense. The biggest concern I still have for Johnson is how his vision holds up in a gap scheme. He has primarily been in non-zone runs this year, and while he has the build and skill set that should fit into a gap scheme, it's just a little bit hard to trust that he can make that transition, which can make it a bit more concerning with a lot of NFL teams starting to lean more towards gap runs in the past few years. Also, while he has started to get very involved as a receiver, his hand technique can still be a little bit shaky, which makes me concerned of how reliable of a pass catcher he truly is. But as I mentioned, there's a lot to like about Johnson, and while he may fit into this very specific role for an offense, he should be very good at that role in the NFL. Now, getting to our top 5. At number 5, we have Nicholas Singleton from Penn State. Singleton was a bit of an odd study over the summer. In his freshman year, he looked like a great rusher, but wasn't reliable in the receiving game. As a sophomore, things kind of flipped when he became a very reliable receiver, but took a step back as a rusher. This year, he has combined the best parts of both of those seasons and looks like a complete back. He has been running with great pad level, vision, and soft hands. He definitely isn't the most explosive back, and likely won't be breaking off any big gains in the NFL, but he has the makings of a reliable workhorse in the NFL. There might be some evaluators who will rank him lower due to getting some time off thanks to Kaytron Allen being on the team, and Singleton not having that elite burst or ability to make defenders miss in the open field, which I do think is fair, but I think his complete skill set will be very appealing to NFL teams. With us now getting to the top 5, I also now have some comps for some of the rest of the backs, and I feel like Najee Harris is a good comp for Singleton. Like Singleton, Harris has a bigger build and doesn't have the elite burst or ability to make defenders miss in the open field, but does a great job in all the other areas of the game to be a steady presence for a team. I know a lot of fantasy people may groan a bit when they think of Singleton being a Najee Harris-like back, but Harris is a quality NFL player and a back that a lot of teams would be very happy to have on their team. Next, number 4, we have the first of our 2 Ohio State running backs in TreVeyon Henderson. Henderson is someone who I've been a fan of for some time. I've been a fan of him being a capable rusher and receiver with the burst to pick up good chunk yards, even if he isn't going to set the combine on fire. He has previously struggled to stay healthy, but now being in a committee with fellow back Quinshon Judkins has helped him stay healthy by reducing his workload. I wouldn't be surprised if an NFL team tries a similar approach with Henderson, especially with the NFL as a whole moving in that direction, but I do think he can handle all the work with his skill set, and with the injuries he's had being more unlucky, mild injuries rather than major ones. While he can do it all in the NFL, I still think that his vision is a little bit shaky when working out inside, and I'd like to see him do a better job sorting out the mess and resisting the urge to bounce runs outside. Also, while he is shifty and quick, his lack of elite speed may lower his ceiling. Due to both having good, not great speed, but having good burst to make up for it, both having 3 down skill sets, and some iffy vision at times as college prospects, I have Tony Pollard as Henderson's comp. The size isn't perfect since Pollard is a little bit taller than Henderson, but as players, I feel they're incredibly similar and gives a good idea of how Henderson could start out in a committee, but develop into a lead back if given the chance in the future. Next, number 3, I have Omarion Hampton from North Carolina. Omarion Hampton was an unsung hero last year who didn't get the credit he deserved due to most of the attention going towards Drake May. This year, with Drake May now in the NFL and Hampton needing to carry the offense after a Week 1 injury to Max Johnson, the team's starting quarterback, he has carried the offense even with defenses focused on stopping the run. He still runs like a bull, breaking through arm tackles, and is on pace to finish with a career high in receptions, and has already set a career high in receiving yards. He still can get a bit carried away with wanting to rush runs, not letting holes open naturally, and getting too eager to blow through defenders instead of trying to minimize contact, but the fight in him is fun to see, and he looks like a complete back. I feel like a perfect comp for Omarion Hampton is Isaiah Pacheco. Both have a tendency to rush their runs and don't always look for ways to minimize contact in the open field. However, both are very effective rushers and pass catchers who can be leaned on as every down backs in the NFL with a patient enough coaching staff to help them work through their bad habits. I think Hampton will have much higher draft capital than Pacheco, but I don't think it's impossible to see him have a similar ceiling if he goes to the right team. For my second best running back, I have the other Ohio State running back Quinshon Judkins. Judkins might be all over the place in people's rankings, but he still remains my second best back thanks to having likely the best vision in the class and having great contact balance. He still isn't a major factor in the receiving game, but has been much more involved going out on routes and has looked solid with the opportunities he's gotten. He has gotten a lot less opportunities to help in pass protection, but has looked solid in the chances he has been given. Judkins is another player who may have the traits to play every down in the NFL if given the chance. While being in a committee with Travion Henderson makes it harder to envision that being the case in the NFL, I think it's a very real possibility, and when you combine his vision and contact balance with that potential, we have potentially a very special player. Due to both having great vision, contact balance, and showing enough to handle third down opportunities, and maybe even due to both playing at Ohio State, I have J.K. Dobbins as Judkins' comp. That comp may not sound too exciting since Dobbins has missed a lot of time due to injury, but is showing this year why he was a coveted talent entering the draft in his early days at Baltimore. Both have great vision and balance to make them fantastic in between tackle runners, and both didn't get a lot of opportunities to show their receiving skills, but are both capable as solid contributors if asked to step up. Hopefully Judkins can have a healthier start to his career and give us an idea of what Dobbins could have been had he stayed healthy. And now at number 1, surprise surprise, is Ashton Jeanty from Boise State. Jeanty was my number 1 back going into the year, which surprisingly was not a common take by a number of rankings I saw, but is a clear top running back in his class and one of the best prospects in the entire class. He has great burst, incredible contact balance, and very smooth and efficient movements to be able to weave around defenders while still keeping his balance to survive tackles. Some people will point to Jeanty beating up on lesser opponents, but he dominated against Oregon and Washington State this year and had good games against Washington, UCF, and UCLA last year, proving that he can do it all regardless of the level of competition he's going against. What I do think is a bit more of a fair complaint is Jeanty's lack of involvement in the receiving game and having a couple drops after having clean hands last year. However, this is still a strength to his game despite Boise State not needing to resort to using him as a receiver as much this year, and he's also looked solid as a pass blocker even against better competition. On top of that, Jeanty has also cleaned up his fumbles and hasn't had a single fumble this year after struggling with this last year. Jeanty was already a great back last year and seemingly still found a way to improve, making it hard for him to find faults in his game. He feels like a pretty clean-cut back based on his skill set and production, and I'm not even going to pretend like it was a hard decision to have him this high since he's in a tier of his own. Due to both being great do-it-all backs with great balance, smooth movement skills, and very capable receivers, I have Alvin Kamara as Jeanty's comp. I know. Alvin Kamara, what an original comp, but it just feels uncanny the way that he slides off tackles the way Kamara does. Both are great receiving backs, which adds a dangerous facet to their game, and I know it's not the most original comp, but I do feel like it accurately shows the type of impact that Jeanty can have in the NFL. And that does it for the running back rankings. Let me know who you think I was too high on or even too low on, or maybe if there's even someone that I just didn't even include that you think should be included. Like I mentioned, there's so many great running backs in this prospective class, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm hoping to have my receiver rankings out early next week, but to make sure you don't miss any future rankings, be sure to subscribe. While you're at it, like the video too, as it'll help this channel and this community. As usual, if you want just to inform the basics of the rankings, you can subscribe to my Substack. But thank you all and see you all next time.